Hello, I'm Anta Brown. I'm the editor of International Construction Magazine, and I'm joined today by Scott Hazelton, who's the managing director at IHS Market, who are a leading provider of information, analytics, and solutions for governments and financial institutions, and lots more. We're going to be talking about China today and the Chinese construction market. Thank you very much for joining us, Scott. We do appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
So such a big and important market, China. So sort of quite a broad question to start, but how would you assess the state of the construction industry in China?
It's yeah, there are really almost, I think, two different industries in China. One is that focused on residential construction and that which is everything else. So residential construction, of course, is plagued by oversupply, by financing challenges, and we saw declines in that sector in 2021. We may have scratched out something under 1% growth in real terms in 2022. So looking forward, we're probably looking at some growth this year, but we're talking about 5% growth in real terms, which is not bad globally, but it's relatively weak by Chinese standards.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And in the past, obviously, the Chinese government have kind of boosted their economy by, spending very heavily in kind of infrastructure. I wonder if you could give us sort of a bit of insight about what kind of levels the government are currently spending in infrastructure and how that might compare to the past.
Sure. So yeah, you're right. With whenever there's sort of a lull, if you will, in the economy, China tends to backfill with spending on infrastructure, which is actually, that's a good thing to do in an economy that is still, I would say it's certainly a developed economy, but there's still a lot of room for expansion in terms of migration from hinterland to cities and so forth. So infrastructure makes a lot of sense to spend money on. Roughly looking at it in real US dollars, which is how we tend to do things to compare across countries. It's a $14 billion market per year, which is comparable to that's something like the total market for China is about 38 billion. So sorry, I'm off by a digit. $3.2 trillion construction economy, of which infrastructure is about 1.4 trillion.
Okay.
So it's a little over a third of the market. It's heavily orientated towards transportation, of course, which is roadways, railways, airports, and in fact for China, seaports as well. Water and sewer, which is what often called public health. So it's about 700 billion. Roughly half of the money in infrastructure goes into transport. The other half is split about evenly between water, sewer, and energy distribution and generation. It's about 350 billion a piece for those two segments. Certainly, the most growth has been historically in transport. I think we're seeing some of that changing now a little bit more towards water, sewer, because of public health issues with migration of cities, but especially in energy. As you need a transition at whatever rate China chooses to transition into a green economy, that implies not just more power for a growing economy, but a different generation source for some of that power as well.
Okay, great. And in terms of the level of spending, is that something that is kind of holding steady? Is that something that kind of the government is still investing as much money as ever into it?
Yeah, in fact, because I think 22 had some challenges in the real estate sector, there was, there was certainly some money added, if you will, to infrastructure budgets. It does seem that was mostly geared towards water and sewer and energy, not as much into transportation projects, which actually makes some sense since that's where the spending has lagged a little bit. Moving forward, we do think it reverts back to its trend, something in the 7-8% range for this year and beyond.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you sort of touched on it a little bit there, but kind of, I wonder kind of how big an investment is kind of China for kind of, so-called, alternative powered equipment and, sustainable equipment.
Yeah, we don't really get into the equipment. What powers the equipment per
Yeah,
se.
but in terms of, I suppose, in terms of the infrastructure and something like that, that kind of China were doing in terms of, being able to power all of these potential electric equipment.
Well, certainly, I think one of the leaders in battery technology is China. So if you're buying equipment, it's a good chance that engineering was coming from China or perhaps Japan or Germany, but or the U.S. But certainly, China's got a strong lead there in battery technology, especially. So I would expect that you will see that at the lower end of the market, the lower end in terms of size class. So the certainly access equipment. The lower range of earth moving is where you'll see, I think, that penetration moves quickly. At the higher end, that really may be a hydrogen solution, not a electric solution at all.
Okay. And what do you sort of see as some of the biggest kind of issues or challenges for the Chinese construction sector?
Well, you've got a market built on a level of growth that simply is not sustainable, in the long term. And so, now the good news, if you will, is that China, excuse me, has some of the same labor concerns that other parts of the world has, increasingly true, which was not historically the case. So, there are limits on the growth from a labor perspective, but also on a machinery perspective, got an economy, geared towards producing tens of thousands of machines that you may not need that same rate of machine generation as the growth of the market slows. So that becomes a case of export markets, and certainly with the Belt and Road Initiative, there's plenty of markets around the world where China's operating as a construction contractor to supply equipment. And the question, of course, is what else can they do in terms of penetrating other markets that are typically not heavily imported from China.
Okay, perfect. My final question, and again, you probably touched on this a little bit, but what would be some of your predictions for the kind of Chinese construction industry in the next few years? Kind of what would you expect to happen, and kind of what areas might get kind of more investment in the future?
Right. So I think residential construction, that short-term challenge, I think, is a long-term challenge actually, because you have the plus and minuses. Okay, so on the minus side, you do now have a case of where the one-child policy is beginning to affect net household formation and slowing that household formation rate down, which is a hindrance to residential construction. You probably had the easiest and largest flow of migration from rural areas to urban areas. The rate of urbanization will slow down, which was another driver of that construction spending. On the plus side, you do have a growing per capita income in China, therefore a demand for higher quality housing. So what you will see is perhaps fewer housing units, but at a higher cost per unit, which means a different kind of construction than you may have seen. Still multifamily, largely, but the size of the interior, the type of equipment installed for plumbing, electrical, so forth may in fact change. China, like everyone else, has experienced COVID, and perhaps in some cases worse than other countries. And so that sort of global perspective on improving HVAC systems, increasing fresh air intake, increasing filtration, those kinds of regulations, I think, are going to stick in China. And then certainly this an overall back to office, I think, question. That's a little more tricky for China. The source of the economy is not as large as it is to say Europe and the US. Manufacturing, you have to go to the plant. Offices, not quite so much, but that certainly is a global trend that once you get used to some sort of remote work, you want to stick with it. So I think this sort of three things: the declining residential importance, with a different kind of mix, the greening, if you will, of construction, and then just a longer, slower growth rate. But that's typical of maturing economies.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Scott, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.